Good morning, creators. In this video I'm going to show you how to build 3 voting systems in Fortnite Creative. The first system, the zone system, gets its input from the player counter and also counts with the same player counter. The button system can use any device like a button or a trigger and counts using a score device, and the hybrid system combines both and uses a button or trigger or any kind of device as its input and uses a player counter for the counter. One thing to note is the zone system lets players change their choice. Button system does not, but the hybrid system does let players change their choice. Use these timestamps to navigate the video. I recommend watching the entire video, but if you don't have enough time, just skip to these timestamps and I'm sure you can build it in less than 5 minutes. So for the zone system, first you want to place down an RNG device, and when you go into the settings, make sure that your second value limit is set to the number of things you want to vote on. The roll time should be set to instant. You should be able to pick every item once, set it to yes, doesn't matter which one, and make sure the zone direction is any direction, but I prefer backwards because it's in the current direction. Length should be the number of things you want to vote on, and I turned audio off because that's just my preference. Next, you want to place on a sequencer, and in settings you want it to loop infinitely. You can set the tempo to whatever you want. The length, I'm making it 0.5 just so it loops really quickly, and that should be all your settings. Next, you want to place down a trigger. We're going to name this trigger Tally V1. And turn off visual effects and sound effects. Next, placing another trigger down. And I'm going to name this one Start Voting. This one will trigger the whole voting system to start whenever you want it to, and you'll have to assign that starting channel on your own. The next one we are going to name Start Tally, which is going to enable the tallying of the votes once everybody has voted. And our final trigger is going to be End Voting, which will end the voting. Next, you're going to want to place down your player counter, and in the settings you're going to want to make it equal to more. The target player count is up to you. I recommend doing it as the max amount of players divided by the number of things you have to vote on. Right now I just set it as 6. Make it disabled, do not include spectators, and use a cylinder zone. If you are using event binding for the zone system, we are going to enable when receiving from Start Voting. We're going to disable when receiving from End Voting. And decrement when receiving from Tally V1. And reset target player count when receiving from Start Voting. When the count succeeds, you want to admit to End Voting. When the count succeeds, you want to transmit on End Voting. Of course, the timing for starting the voting and all these other triggers right here are up to you. You can use a sequencer, etc. For Start Tally, you want to send an event to the sequencer, so you want to start the sequence. And on End Voting, hold on. you want to end the sequence when receiving from end voting. So make sure that your zone is visible in game. That's going to make it easier to vote. And when a vote is completed, you want to make sure that you send an event when count succeeds to whatever your thing that you're voting on is. So for example, I'm using an explosive device. It's going to explode when this is voted on. To create another voting module, all you gotta do is copy these 3 devices and then place them along the RNG device. You'll see that start voting will enable the player counters, and start tally will start reducing the score of the player counters. And even though I won, there's an automatic tie breaking system in case there is a tie. Now for channels, for start voting, you want to send an event to channel 1, which is going to enable player counter and reset target player count. For start tally, you want to transmit on 2, which is going to start the sequence. And for end voting, you're going to transmit on 3, which is going to end the sequence, in addition to disabling the player counter. Next, you're going to decrement the target player count when receiving from 4, and the tally device will transmit on channel 4. And of course, when count succeeds, you're going to transmit on 5. So 5 will be the channel at which an event happens. So if you're voting on something, it'll happen receiving from 5. If you copy the module, you're going to have to increment the previous channels, which you used 4 and 5, by 2. So the second module will take up channels 6 and 7, and the third one will take up channels 8 and 9, etc. That way there's no overlapping. And as you see, the third one won. You also want to add additional end votings to be triggered by these channels. So you want to create one for each outcome 5, 7, and 9. That way it's always triggered no matter which vote happens. For the button device setup, you're first going to want to place an RNG device. Similar settings to the first one. The second value should be set to the number of things you want to vote on. Roll time should be instant. Pick each number once, turn to yes. Doesn't matter which one. Zone direction, turn on. I put it as backwards. And I turned audio off, just for convenience. Next, you're going to want to place down a sequencer. And you want to loop infinitely. Change the tempo if you want. Length should be short, the shortest you have. And the rest of the settings should work. Next, place down a trigger. We're going to name this one Tally V1. And turn off sound effects and visual effects. Next, we're going to place down another trigger and name this one Start Voting. The next one we're going to place down and name it Start Tally. And the last one we're going to place down will be called End Voting. Next, we're going to place down a button. In the settings, we're gonna name it input v1. And we're gonna disable it on game start. And you could add interaction text, i.e. like option 1 or whatever you're voting on. And next, you're gonna place down a score device. We're gonna name this one counter. Vote counter. My bad. For the settings, we're gonna change the score when activated to 1. Minimum score is gonna be 0. And maximum score is going to be the number of votes you want to have as maximum. Like whatever will be the winning score. Make sure the number is visible in game. And send a score, or send an event when scoring to the amount of votes you want it to have. And so we'll be changing this one after we paste that down. So first we're going to paste down a secondary vote counter. And we're going to name this one vote counter in parentheses cosmetic. It doesn't do anything, but it does count the votes. So in our tally, we're going to increment the first vote counter, not the cosmetic one, but the first vote counter. When we're seeing from the tally, of course, so add that here. And on score output, we want to transmit on end voting. We want to trigger that so that it will end everything. And if you want to send an event, say you're voting on a weapon loadout, it's also going to be sent on max score output. You're going to enable input v1 when receiving from start voting, and disable when receiving from end voting. The sequencer is going to start when receiving from start tally, and stop when receiving from end voting. So my event's just going to be an explosive. So if it's voted on, the explosive will happen. So on score output, we are going to blow it up. And to copy this, just copy all the score devices, the button, and the trigger, and the event. And just paste it down along the RNG device within these zones. And now you have 3 modules. And as you see when we're testing, each one works independently of each other. And I can clearly vote. Now the button's enabled. And I can press it as many times as I want. And as a disclaimer, I recommend adding a teleporter whenever they press the button. Otherwise they can just spam the button and instantly win the vote. So teleport the player away from the voting system once they vote. And as you can see, even though the first score was incremented, the second one counted the number of times a player physically voted. So the tally does not count on the second one. The second one can be used as a cosmetic. The channel system, you want start voting to transmit on channel 1. Which is going to enable the button. We want start tally to transmit on 2, which is going to transmit on start sequence. And you want end voting to transmit on 3, which is going to disable the button and stop the sequence. On start sequence, you also want to reset the score. is channel 1. And when interacted with, you want to transmit on 4. We're just going to tally the vote counter. So it's going to increment on channel 4. And on score output, oh, we're not doing that yet. Oh yeah. On score output, we are going to come on, man. Come on, man. What are you doing? Transmit on 5. Yes. Of course, I did not add it for some stupid reason, but tally. Yes, there it is. Sorry. When trigger transmit on 4, which will also tally the vote counter. And the explosive should happen on 5, which is going to be your event. So if you want to like assign a loadout, transmit on 5. When you want to copy modules, make sure you change the channels. So I will be adding 2 to like the channels 4 and 5 previously, because those are individual to the modules. And I'm adding 4 to these because this is a third module. You also want to add additional end votings to be triggered by these channels. So you want to create one for each outcome 5, 7, and 9. That way that's always triggered no matter which vote happens. And in the testing it should work like this. So you're first going to trigger your start voting. I'm just going to enable the buttons. You can vote as many times as you want. So I recommend adding a teleporter when they vote, just to make sure that they can't spam the vote. And when starting tally, you can see it automatically chose the winner based off of how many votes it had. If you want to use a hybrid system, first place it on an RNG device, set the value limit to the number of things you want to vote on, the roll time to instant, and pick each number once to yes, doesn't matter which one. Enable the zone direction, and reduce the length to the amount of votes you want to have, and play audio off, which is my preference. Next you're going to place down a sequencer, and loop infinitely on, reduce the length to as small as you can, and the rest of the settings should work. Next place down a trigger, and we are going to name it Tally V1. Then we're going to place down, we're going to change VFX and SFX off, and place down another trigger. So it's going to be start voting. The next one's going to be named start tally. And the last one's going to be called end voting. Then you're going to want to place down a button device. We're going to name this one input V1. And set disabled at game start. And you can add interaction text if you want. For example, I'm using option 1. Next, you'll place down your class selector. Set time to switch to instant. And class to switch to 1. Next, you'll place down your player counter. Set player count to equal or more, and the player count could be the number of votes you want it to have to win. Make sure counter class is selected to 1. Make sure to disable the zone and do not include spectators. I know it says I turned it on, but disable it and you should be good. Place down a class designer and just flip it to 1. Enable when receiving from start voting, and disable when receiving from end voting. Next, open up on Interact and Event 2, Class Selector, change player to class. Then open up your player counter. You're going to want to decrement when receiving from tally v1. And reset target player count when receiving from start voting. And because I messed up earlier, I turned enabling off, so it's disabled on game start. And so you're going to enable it when receiving from start voting, and disable it when receiving from end voting. Open up your sequencer, start sequence when receiving from start tally, and stop when receiving from end voting. Make sure to open up the player counter, and on count succeeds, transmit to whatever event you want to have. For example, you want to end voting, and in addition, I'm going to use an explosive device. So on count succeeds, I want that to explode, so I'm going to connect it like this. When you want to copy a module, just copy every single device from this line and copy it over. This will automatically create a new event binding system between these devices, so they're no longer connected to the other ones. Make sure you change the classes and all the other ones. So the second one will be class 2, and the third one will be class 3, etc. So if you're using more modules, you can just change the class up to 16. So as we're testing, you'll see start voting enables buttons and the zones. Selecting that will switch me to a team or class, and each one will put me in a certain class that is counted by the vote counter. And as it's tally, you'll see that the third one is the one that explodes. And there you go. If you're using the channel system, start voting is going to transmit on 1, which is going to enable the player counter and reset target player count. Input v1 is going to be enabled on start voting, so 1. Start tally is going to transmit on 2, and start sequence is going to happen on 2. And voting is going to transmit on 3. We're just going to stop the sequence and disable the player counter and disable the input. The input will transmit on 4, which will activate the class team selector to change player to class. And this tally device will transmit on 5, which is going to decommit the player counter. Now the player counter is going to send event to channel 6. So on count succeeds, transmit on 6. And so this end voting is going to be triggered by 6. And when you want to create another module, copy all of these devices. Paste them along the line like this. And change the classes. And the channels 4, 5, and 6 should be added 3 to. So 4 is going to become 7. 5 is going to become 8. And 6 is going to become 9. This makes sure that the other modules are separated from the others. Create another end voting. And this one's going to be triggered by channel 9. And to create a third module, do the same thing again with just 3 new channels. Change the classes. Change the channels. Make sure you change the player counter counted class as well. You'll see a disclaimer where I had to fix it because I forgot the first round. So make sure you change all of the classes so that it only counts that specific class. As you see here, I'm fixing that. Player counter only counts 2. This one only counts 3. And create yet another vote ending that is triggered by 12. So as you can see in our testing, start voting is going to enable the zone and the buttons. Each button will put us in a certain class. And as it's telling, you'll see the second one is the one that's going to win. And it did. If you found this tutorial helpful, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, etc. Anything to help out the algorithm. I'm a starving college kid, so any help really helps out. I want to continue making these tutorials, so if you have anything you need help with, please leave them in the comments. I'll look through them all. And thank you for watching. Have an amazing day.